That's nice. Yeah, let's have a conversation. I'm Hannah. I am currently product manager at Server Density. We're a SaaS solution for infrastructure monitoring. But more importantly, I am a recovering DevOps consultant. I've been doing that for the past 2 years, right up until February. And this presentation is about really a lot of the things I learned during that time. Another thing you should know about me is I've got a bit of a cold today. I know, I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. So, if you want to give me a break from talking and ask a question, that would be awesome. Please do that. So,
but do it quite loudly.
Do it, do it loudly so the camera picks it up. So I wanted to start today by telling a bit of a story about what DevOps means to me. So when I started my career, I was in this massive enterprise organisation, and because I was young and I had a lot of energy, I was given the job of a release manager, a job that quite often doesn't exist anymore. Does anyone here have like release managers in their organisation still? Yay! Okay, so that was 2 hands. 2 hands for the camera. That was 2 hands. So basically, what my job was to do, it was not just to be the go-between between development teams and operations teams when it was time to release something new into production, which we did quarterly. We only did it every 3 months. It was also to coordinate all of the silos within those silos. So I had to coordinate with a separate test team. I had to coordinate with infrastructure, network, server and storage, application support, infrastructure support. These were all different teams in the organisation. So during that time I learned an awful lot about what it takes to ship software. And I also learned an awful lot about how to do it really badly. So the run-up to our releases were always fraught with last-minute issues. We'd have differences between environments which threw up unexpected problems with the software. We'd have bugs that could only be reproduced in certain environments. That sort of typical scenario of it works on my machine, you know. This was actually across everyone's machines, across all environments. Nothing was consistent. And of course we worked long hours to try and meet our target release date. And unfortunately, when that day came, and when we did have approval to go live, and when we did go live during that 48-hour deployment window that we had, through which we worked 24/7, everything managed to blow up in our faces. It didn't matter how well we prepared, something would go wrong, and we'd then spend the next days and weeks in a war room, trying to restabilize the production environment, trying to fix those bugs that could only be reproduced in production, trying to handle the unexpected customer behavior on the website, etc., etc., etc. And in this environment, it really took its toll on the people that I worked with. It took its toll on me, if I'm completely honest. And the number of meetings that I went into, which ended up in sort of full-blown arguments, the number of people I saw cry in the office when things were particularly fraught, was pretty much a baptism of fire when it comes to learning about how to do technology. It was supposed to be fun, it was supposed to be creative, it was supposed to be bleeding edge, but this process was killing us. So following that, I went on to take a lead role on projects. I became a program manager, I became a head of technology in this organisation, and throughout my whole career I was focused on how do I prevent this from happening, how do I manage these risks, how do I protect my team from this harm. And that's when I discovered DevOps. In 2011 I read Continuous Delivery. I got involved in the DevOps community, and for me it was the answer. For a lot of people it's the answer to the question, how do I ship more faster? But for me it was the answer to, how do I do this without killing my team? which is what DevOps means to me, and which is why I come to events like this and I go to conferences and I talk about human ops, because there's a lot of human aspects to working in technology that don't get talked about enough. So, to go back to basics with what is DevOps, we have CALMs. Obviously, a few of you will know what this is. Does anyone know where it came from? So actually, this almost predates or sort of aligns with the release of continuous delivery, but it was created by Damon Edwards and John Willis at the very first DevOps days that happened in the US following the initial one in Ghent. They actually called it CAMS to start with, and it was Jez Humble that added the L for lean. We use this sort of terminology a lot, and I like to point out to people that two of these five aspects of DevOps are about human stuff. And yet I quite often go to DevOps meetups and all you'll talk about is how we're managing our container orchestration. Containers are not on here. The C is culture. This is not containers. There is no D for Docker in here. So personally, I think we don't talk about the human elements of this enough, and that's what I'm here to do. More recently, Jennifer Davis and Catherine Daniels have released a book called Effective DevOps, and they believe the four pillars of effective DevOps are collaboration, affinity, tools, and scaling. I don't think it's a coincidence that this spells cats. By the way. But again, we've got all of this lovely human stuff, this lovely fluffy human stuff that we don't like talking about, but it is sort of widely recognised that DevOps done properly is about the people as much as it is the tech. And what we tend to do as technologists and as sort of practitioners is to leave this stuff to somebody else. We sort of look at it and think, oh, that's not my problem. Like, we escalate it to our managers. Someone else is going to fix this. So one of the points that I really want to emphasize today is that actually the human element of this is everybody's objective. Because if everybody isn't engaged in it, then it just won't happen. And finally, sort of looking outwards, I was really pleased when I picked up the DevOps Handbook, which was released last year, and saw a section on the ethics of DevOps. I like this passage, especially. DevOps, astonishingly, enables us to simultaneously improve organizational performance, achieve the goals of all the various functional technology roles, and improve the human condition. Right. Astonishingly, it improves the human condition. How nice is that? And how nice is that to talk about as well as a reason that we want to embrace DevOps, as a reason that we want to do this, that we will improve the human condition, the health and the well-being of the people in our team and ourselves. I think that's very powerful. And of course, it does improve your organisational performance as well. You know, no one does anything just to feel good about it. It's going to improve your bottom line too. Some old speckled hen because I'm coughing. And we know that culture is sort of at the heart of DevOps, and everybody wants to get to that DevOps culture where everyone is collaborating, sharing knowledge and working in harmony with each other. Excuse me. But we don't know how to get there, and no, containers will not fix your broken culture. But one of the key questions we get a lot is, well, actually, what will? And it's not as easy as it looks. So when we approach these problems as engineers, we sometimes think about human issues as though they were a configuration problem. And I've seen this in a number of DevOps-related talks, and we talk about culture as though it's a thing that can be fixed, as though we can do things to it, and that it can be done overnight. Sorry. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. You can't go, oh hey, I found a bug. It's in our culture. It's just a config issue. We need to fix all that blame we've got going around. Let's release that on Wednesday next week. It's like, it doesn't work like that. We know it doesn't work like that, but quite often when you're going through a DevOps transformation or you're trying to adopt a more DevOps culture, we look at these human problems the same way as we look at our technical problems. So what is culture? I quite like this definition of culture in a working context. Culture determines what is acceptable or unacceptable, important or unimportant, right or wrong, workable or unworkable. It encompasses all learned and shared, explicit or tacit assumptions, beliefs, knowledge, norms and values, as well as attitudes, behaviour, dress and language. I think this gives us a very real insight into why changing culture is so hard. Let's look at things like beliefs and values. Let's look at behaviours, and let's talk about the way we change those, because those are actually very personal and actually very difficult to move at an organisational level. How many people have witnessed some of these like beliefs in their office? Quite often the operations team will truly, hand on heart, believe that developers do not care about production. They really will. And developers will really believe that the operations team do not care about the new features that are important to the business. These are things that I've seen. And of course, no one cares about security. No one. That's what security believe, and that's why they're so very sad about everything. But the thing about this is that humans are so complicated. We have 90 billion nerve cells. Each of them is linked by trillions of connections, hundreds of trillions of different pathways through which an individual brain signal could travel. And unfortunately for us, when we're talking about making changes, is most of this processing is done completely subconsciously. You don't actually have control of this all of the time. So when we're talking about behaviours and when we're talking about beliefs, a lot of it isn't even within our conscious control. And when we want to change these things, quite a useful way of thinking about it is like it's a bad habit. So if you've got a bad habit, like say you like biting your nails or something like that, quite often you don't even know you're doing it. You don't even know you're doing it until it's too late and you've already done it. And this is how we can think about some of the behaviours and the beliefs that sort of influence our behaviours in a work situation, because they are habits that we formed, and they're habits that have been reinforced through potentially years, tens of years of experience on the job. And it's only now that we're asking people to challenge these beliefs, and it's only now that we're asking people to think about things differently. Essentially, part of our brain is programmed wrong, and we need to refactor it. So, let's get to know our brains a little. There's essentially, this is very oversimplified by the way, 3 layers within the brain. The outer brain is the thinking brain, it's the logical brain. In the middle we've got the emotional brain, which is our mammal brain, and right at the centre we've got the reptilian brain, which is the oldest. It's the oldest, and it's also the most automatic. It's the part that takes care of everything that we don't need to consciously think about. So this is a problem we understand. We've got some legacy that we need to deal with. We've got some legacy code in our heads, lurking behind an abstraction layer, always useful, and it's not behaving as we would expect. It's influencing how we react and behave all day, every day. And it's not easy to change. Legacy code is hard to reprogram. It takes much more energy and much more effort to bring something into your conscious mind and make a conscious decision to do things differently than it is to act out of instinct, to do things automatically. One good way of thinking about this is that the sort of neural pathways in your mind are like a thick forest. Your signals are like a person walking through that forest. You're going to want to walk the path that is well trodden. You're going to want to go down those pathways that somebody has been before. The more you've sort of reinforced those different thought patterns, the easier it is to fall into them in the future, and the harder it is to go in a different way. And that's what's happening when we try to change our behaviour at work. The saying goes that neurons that fire together wire together, and that is completely true. One of the very first steps, if you realise that you've got some of these automatic behaviours happening and that you want to make a change to them, is to try to gain an awareness of when they're being triggered. This is something called self-directed neuroplasticity, and it becomes easier if you practice things like mindful meditation. So the more aware you are of where your attention is in the moment, the more able you are to make conscious decisions about where you want it to be and how you want to behave. That's just one of the ways that as an individual we can maybe make things a little bit easier for ourselves. But there's a lot more going on here than just a few bad habits, which is why I want to talk about change for a minute, because I think if DevOps was happening in isolation, we might stand a chance at influencing our organisations. But it's a lot harder than that. We're seeing transformational change in almost every aspect of our jobs, and it's not something that's going to stop. These are the sort of changes that I've been through in the course of my career already. Agile transformation, automation, offshoring, digital transformation. We've adopted containers, outsourcing, test-driven development, behavior-driven development, cloud, continuous delivery, DevOps. And when we make these big changes to our working environment, and when we try to do them all at once, it really takes a toll on our people. I mean, I've come to believe that working in technology is a constant battle with transformational change. I don't think this is going to slow down. I think it's going to accelerate. And the people and the businesses that are going to be able to thrive in this are the ones that are adaptable to change. But again, humans do not deal with change in the same way that our infrastructure does. You do not simply upgrade a human. You can't just deploy a new version with a different skill set overnight. There's no A/B testing when you want to cut over to your new version. Managing change from a people perspective is actually really difficult, and the human components of our platforms respond very differently. So now I want to tell you a little bit of a story about my first day of work. I seem to look back on these early days of my career a lot, but I learned a lot. So on my first day of work, I started as a graduate trainee in this large enterprise, and they took us off to this rather grand country house. We had lovely food and lots of beer later in the evening, but during the day we had our induction sessions, which were basically a bit of corporate brainwashing, if you like. So we were told about the strategy of the company, we were bigged up a bit, we were told how we were the future. But there was one guy there who came and talked to us, and what he did was he warned us about the well of despair. And that was pretty much the only thing I took away from that day that was useful. So because we were going through a big change in our lives, we'd all just finished uni and we were going into a corporate working environment for the first time. he warned us that this was a huge life change and that we were going to go through something called the emotional cycle of change, and that at times we were going to feel like we were in the well of despair. And he said that you will start to doubt yourself, you'll start to think that you're not valuable here, you'll start to think that you're not good enough, and you'll really want to give up. But what he told us, which was the most powerful thing, was that this was completely normal and that we would all go for it. And actually, most of us did. All at different times to different degrees, but we all went through this dip, maybe 3-4 months into our jobs, where we really felt like we were in the wrong place, we were doing the wrong thing. What were we doing with our lives anyway? Did we really want to work in an office? Will I ever be able to do this job as well as my colleagues? Completely full of self-doubt. But because we knew that the well of despair was normal, we were able to talk to each other about it. So instead of pretending that everything was great, and that this massive change wasn't affecting us, we could slump down in the canteen at lunchtime and despair at how awful we were feeling, and then shake our fingers at each other and say, well, it sounds like you're in the well of despair, but don't worry about it. Not to be dismissive, but if you know that you're going through a process and that there is an end in sight, it makes it feel a hell of a lot better than pretending that there's no problem at all. So I wanted to spend a bit of time today talking about the emotional cycle of change, because at the end of the day, DevOps is a huge change to the way traditional organisations run technology. Has anyone seen this before? Just before I start talking through it. So we've got motivation on the left-hand side and time across the bottom. So you can see that your motivation sort of peaks during the beginning stages of any change. And you get the peak of uninformed optimism. Everything looks great. All of the benefits are very clearly in focus, and none of the negatives are even coming to mind at that point in time. As you learn more about what the change means to you, you start slipping down the slope of informed pessimism. Basically, some of the challenges come into focus. And things start to get hard. It's not as easy. Maybe some of the benefits aren't as good as you thought they would be. And that's when you get the well of despair. The well of despair is the pits. You don't feel like you can continue. You feel like you want to give up. You feel like it's impossible. A lot of people leave their jobs when they reach the well of despair because they don't see how things could ever get better. They give up. But if you do push forward, and if you do try to make progress, you start to see things as they really are, and that's where the hopeful realism comes in. So you climb the slope of hopeful realism, learning more as you go, and then you get to the lovely panacea of the rewarding completion. Has anyone ever been through something like this, or has been through something like this recently? Yeah. I'm going to have a drink. Someone tell a story.
I think it's interesting on this chart that informed pessimism measures the same as hopeful realism. The motivational factor is the same on those two things. If you skip the word despair, their point on the graph is the same. I think I normally would be pessimistic the whole time. That's a philosophical decision. If you want to live your life like that, no.
Do you think it applies?
So you would never feel that
optimism to
optimism.
organisations as well as to individuals?
I think it potentially does. I think that we do experience this at an individual level, though. But when enough individuals are going into that slump, I think it can create this like critical mass, and you can lose all sort of momentum with a change. I've definitely seen that happen. I'll go on to my next slide because it sort of relates to what you said.
Can I just ask you whether is that true of all change? So I can see that it's true of like top-down change. So we every few years go through a restructure of our teams for some reason, and people can't necessarily see the value of it, even though there may be values and benefits when people go through this pattern of change. But where the change is more self-generated, so a team wants to change the way that it's working,
Yeah.
it seems to be a bit more, although you might find individuals might have issues with it, it's generally a bit easier.
Yeah. I'm going to explain exactly why that's true. You are exactly right. Bottom-up changes tends to land a lot better than top-down changes, and there's a very good psychological reason for that. I'm going to come on to that. So I'll plow on because I want to answer your question as soon as possible. So that rewarding completion is something that I've not experienced too many times in my career. Maybe I've just been within organisations that have been going through an awful lot of change simultaneously, but I feel like as soon as I get my head around one thing, I get thrown straight down into the well of despair on the next big thing that's coming over the horizon. It's not an emotional cycle of change, but an emotional cycle of changes. And I think some of the organisations I've worked with have got a little bit of transformation fatigue around this, becoming a little bit cynical about, okay, well, this is the next big thing. What are we going to do about this? And it does, and that doesn't help. I think there's something to be learned from not inflicting too much change on your humans, or doing it in a different way, because we can only cope with so much at one time. It's okay to keep changing, but this is where I think something like continuous improvement is much more powerful as a tool for us to use to make really fundamental changes than spinning up a multi-million-pound transformation program. So that's sort of my take on it, and my experience of big transformational change, like you said, top-down change, has been that I felt like I've been thrown from one well of despair into the next, or if I haven't been in it myself, I've been helping my team through that experience. But change is constant, and we do need to keep changing. So what's the answer? How can we make this emotional roller coaster a little bit less bumpy? And the answer is resilience. So this is a word we know. We like load balances. We like to back up our data. We like to worry about resiliency in our systems. Resilience is the ability to quickly recover from difficulties, and it means exactly the same for humans as it does for the platforms that we build. Resilience is what takes that massive well of despair into maybe a mere bump in the road. And the great thing about resilience is that it can be improved. Resilience is not something finite that you have or you do not have. Resilience is a set of skills that you can learn and develop over time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about resilience. As I've already said, in the study of resilience, opinions have changed, because I think in traditional sort of psychology and actually in a lot of the sort of language we use around resilience, is used to describe a sort of trait of character, but actually opinions have changed. Resilience involves behaviours and thoughts and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. Nobody's got some sort of baseline level of resilience that they're born with that makes them better at recovering to changes than others. It's just a set of skills that you can develop over time. And if you want to, you can get better at this. So, what elements of our environment and what elements of our lives and ourselves can we use to help improve our resilience? What can we do to help ourselves, and what can we do to help the people around us? It was there's a psychologist called Garmezi who first sort of turned the tables on the research that happened around what resilience was. Instead of looking at the negative factors which caused people to falter, to cause people to not be resilient, he started to look at the positive actions that could make people more resilient, and he coined the term protective factors to sort of encompass these. These are elements of an individual's environment, background, or personality that enable success despite challenges. These are the things that are going to prevent you dropping into that deep, dark well of despair. These are the things that are going to make the road a little bit less bumpy for you in the face of changes. One of the most interesting things about protective factors is that, about resilience, is that it was found that individuals who have an internal locus of control, individuals who believe that their outcomes are in control, determined by their hard work, attributes and decisions, are much more resilient in the face of challenges than those who believe that nothing is within their control. This is the difference between someone throwing up their hands and going, "This is impossible, I cannot do it," versus someone who says, "This feels really impossible. This feels impossible right now. This feels impossible, so I'm going to take a few steps to understand it better and figure out whether I can do anything to improve this." And the thing about this is, yes, it is completely affected by the environment that you're operating within, but it's also about your individual perspective. You can learn to think in that way, even if you're over this side at the moment. You can learn to control your thoughts and believe that better possibilities and better outcomes are possible and that you have some influence on that. And that's a really powerful thing. Yeah.
Is this the same thing as the growth mindset?
Quite possibly, yeah. I should put that on. But yeah, this is really about feeling like, as an individual, you're in control of your own destiny. That's like the fundamental level. At an organisational level, it's about what you mentioned earlier. It's about, okay, well, I have some influence on the outcome. I'm not having things done to me constantly.
Being a bit of a geek, I like to take all my ideas from TV sci-fi shows. So there's an episode of Red Dwarf where the cat says, "In the game of cat and mouse, you have to be the cat." So what he means is you have to be the one making the game. You have to think that way.
Yeah, exactly. We like cats. I might add that in there. So this is where we start to talk about culture again. So in the context of encouraging your team and encouraging yourself to develop that internal locus of control, if you're in an organisation that's very much top-down management, you're going to have a harder time of that than if you have an organisation where you have trust and autonomy in your actions. People who are trusted and have autonomy over their actions are more likely to have that internal locus of control, and that leads to greater resilience, which means they're more adaptable in the face of changes, which means that all of these changes that are happening to us will be more easily received. If you use top-down management, then it encourages people to have that external locus of control, that they don't believe that they've got a say in the outcome, and instead of developing their resilience, you're actually making the well of despair deeper and darker than it necessarily needs to be. And one of the sort of interesting things I think about this is, like, how many of us have sort of looked at microservices and all of the benefits of those, and autonomous teams is often cited as one of the key benefits of developing a microservices architecture. And I kind of like the way that our technology patterns are mirroring some of the key positive human attributes of organisations that allow us to thrive. So to give teams autonomy, you need to build in small pieces, you need to be able to deliver independently, and that actually helps teams to feel like they have control of their own destiny. and that actually helps teams to have a greater resilience as individuals and as a collective, and that helps teams to develop changes faster. So you can see why the companies that are embracing DevOps wholeheartedly are outperforming those that aren't. It's because of the technology factors, but it's also because of the human factors that align so strangely, conveniently with that. Which is why I like to bring the human aspects of it into focus. I'm going to go a bit deeper now and talk about trust. What is trust? Apparently trust is the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. And we know that culture is a product of people's beliefs, values, and behaviours. We know that creating a culture of trust and autonomy can help with our resilience and help us adapt to changes. But how do we build trust? And what is trust anyway? Is trust something you feel, or is it something you do? Are you saying, do we have relationships built on trust? That's a feeling. Or are you using trust? Are you saying, is trust an action that you do? I am trusting you with this responsibility. And I think when we consider trust as an action that we choose to do, trust becomes a very powerful tool. Trust is earned when actions meet words. And so many of the beliefs that we hold about those other teams, whether or not your development, whether or your operations, so many of those come down to trust, not trusting that people will do what they say they have, trusting that people will deliver when you expect them to, etc. And the way I like to think about trust is, if we've got some legacy code in our brains, if we've got that little reptilian brain in the middle that's driving our automatic behaviours, then trust is like some sort of awful spaghetti code integration layer that makes us relate to other people in very different ways. And so many of the challenges that we find in organisations is, how do we really build that trust? And here's an inconvenient thing about trust. So trust begets trust. If you trust somebody, you make them more trustworthy. So if you mistrust someone, they actually will become less trustworthy. That's the thing about giving people autonomy to make their own decisions. If you give people the responsibility and the accountability of their actions, then they are more likely to take that responsibility seriously, and they are more likely to do a good job of it than if you take that power away from them. And I like to talk about change approval boards at this point, because who's been to a CAB meeting where it's felt like the change approvers had more power than the people who were implementing the change itself? Every single CAB ever. And what does that say about trust and the relationship dynamics that are happening in that room? You're not trusted. It is assumed that you will break things. It is assumed that you will go wrong, and the accountability for that change is then shifted. It's shifted to that group of people in the change approval board, and the more that they take the power away from the individuals, the more the individuals will give them that power. If you say, well, I met all the criteria for the change approval board, doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do. It just means that you met a set of criteria. If you take the control away from people, they won't always take the initiative that you expect them to. Trust begets trust. And I think at this point, actually, what I was going to say was, I'm not saying that we're doing DevOps wrong. I'm not saying that anybody who's ever given a talk on DevOps is wrong. What I'm trying to do in this talk is look at DevOps through a different lens. Look at DevOps through the lens of the people who are doing work in technology, whether it be development or operations.
I think the thing about change advisory boards and all this kind of stuff, I think that we get that, see how people have CAB and our place. It kind of symbolises in a many way a low trust culture. But they're obviously afraid that if they don't have this, then everything will be chaotic and nothing will work and stuff like that. And really, it's kind of trying to develop your practices so that you more often get things right than get things wrong. So they can trust you without having to go through that procedure. But also, I think they need to not assume that every change will be a success, and that some changes will fail, and you have to learn from that failure.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
really,
that's where the sort of blame culture comes into it.
I'd rather the CAB kind of saying, rather than a slap on the wrist, you got that wrong, saying, okay, you got that wrong this time, can you see how you would not get that wrong next time? That's not how they usually approach it.
And having the ability, like in some organisations, having the ability to do things that you need to do, to fix things. Quite often, it's a long chain of a lot of different teams that you need help from in order to get where you need to be. But I completely agree with you. I think I've had this conversation at a few DevOps events before, and it's like, well, what is the role of CAB in a continuous delivery world? And it should be that your processes are so routine and that they're so low risk, and that you have sufficient quality measures in place that every change is a business as usual change, and that's the sort of definition, isn't it? And actually, I think if every change is business as usual, if it's a routine, then the change approval board has nothing to do with that change at all. There's no seal of approval; it just goes under the radar. Maybe there are scenarios where you need a change approval board, but I think it should be more about facilitating cross-functional change. If things can be shipped independently, they should be, and there should not be a different party getting in the way of that.
Is there a role for them to be judging that though? To be saying, to make sure that process is followed, and that have you demonstrated that you're able to deliver this change independently? Do you have enough to roll back or dark launch or whatever to be able to avoid the problems before they come up? Have you demonstrated that? Not is the change a good one to make? Are you going to cause a problem? But are you going about the continuous delivery the right way?
So I think there is a little bit of chicken and egg. So the way I would look at that, I would say that the emphasis should be on the team doing the change rather than on the change approval board to say yay or nay. I think the emphasis is on the team to make sure that their changes ship successfully, and I think this is where the philosophy of like you build it, you run it in production, and having some developers on call some of the time when their changes are going live is very powerful, because if you understand the impact that it has on people and on the business, like firsthand, when something does go wrong, then you're more likely to prevent that next time round. I think quite a lot of the time development teams are actually quite protected from all of the operational sort of pain that sometimes changes in the past have caused.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about whether it will get fixed eventually. It's like how much chaos does it cause before it gets fixed.
Yeah.
So the way I tend to approach it is not like talk me through your technical decisions and I'm going to vet each one of them. It's like, tell me how you're going to release it. Like, how are you going to release this? How are you going to deal with the problem if you release it? How are you going to test it beforehand? Which users are you going to select for it? Show me that you've considered these things before you've done it, and then I'll approve it before you have, before you go up. Not just like, okay, you're optimistic, you're excited about the idea, you're going to go off, you're going to release it, and then you're going to realise that you didn't test it with this type of user, and you're going to cause chaos for them before you get it fixed. That's my kind of way of trying to approve the change without trying to second guess the team.
Yeah. I think it's good. I think it could work if it was in a collaborative way. As soon as you take that power away from the team and you give them a checklist that they must conform to, they're not going to think about anything else. I think if you take away the safety net, actually, people will come to the right conclusions on their own. They'll be like, okay, well, what's going to happen when this goes live? There's no one checking our homework here. So that's the way I like to think about it.
It's like you asking it as part of the team, or you asking it as somebody outside
Yeah.
the team. If you're part of it, it's part of the team. If it's running for verification from someone else, and it changes the dynamic.
I think it can be a type of change. If we have the confidence that the team in the pipeline is working, then what we need to do is make sure the change board looks at the way the pipeline changes, because that's the way code then doesn't get shipped properly. So actually their change shifts from looking at the application code and the infrastructure being deployed as the tools that have been used to deploy that infrastructure in code. So they could actually get more involved in the pipeline, because that becomes then the critical thing. If the pipeline works and you're going to change it, it could cause the pipeline to stop working. So that's where it might come from.
Yeah. I like that idea as well, because there's a lot of change managers out there at the moment, and there's not, as mainstream as DevOps has become, there's not a huge amount of organisations that are there yet. There's still a lot of people who are operating in the old way, or they're trying to make changes in isolation or in smaller areas, and it's good to sort of see a direction for those type of for people who are doing those roles at the moment. I was a release manager. That was part of my job, to make sure releases check all the boxes on the checklist. I didn't know any better, and I found my way into this type of work. I think it's interesting to think about the change managers as being the sort of governing body of the pipelines into production, rather than the gatekeepers of just that one environment.
Yeah, and I think if the change people can see that what you're doing is you're trying to get good practices where you have got your test environments the same as your production environments. You are deploying, continuously into those environments, going through those things. They can see those processes in place, and that's what they should be. That's what they should be focused on.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
are the processes to show that they can actually keep,
I
deploying?
know. Looking back, if every time we deployed to our pre-production environment, everything went wrong for a week, why did we have any confidence that deploying into production would be any different? It's sort of baffling looking back. It's like, well, why did we think that? Like, why was I in that change approve board? Like, it's all sorted now. We're totally okay to go live. Not easy being the face of every single failed change. That was me. So we're almost there. I've been talking for like 47 minutes. I'm sorry. But I want to talk about stress for a minute, because stress also plays a big factor in our ability to navigate changes in our environment. So whilst we might know exactly where we want to be, we're not there yet, and guess what? Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Things are going wrong. Everyone's angry and everyone is stressed. What happens is that all of those old automatic thought processes and behaviours are going to get triggered off automatically, and you're going to behave in exactly the same way you've always behaved, and everyone around you is going to do the same. You're back in a war room and no one's feeling very collaborative anymore. Stress can be a huge barrier to change. It triggers your fight or flight instincts within the stress systems in your brain, and it also has an impact on your attention, your decision making, your ability to listen and understand. That doesn't feel like a great sort of place of mind to be in when you're trying to make these sort of fundamental changes to your culture. And guess what? It's that reptilian brain again, high. It's the legacy components in your brain triggering your fight or flight reflexes when you're in these stressful situations, actually impacting your ability to make conscious decisions, impacting your ability to make good informed decisions, to listen and to understand. It's not your fault. It's your brain. And actually, the thing about coping with stress and the thing about regulating any of your behaviours or your automatic behaviours or temptations is that the more you do it, the less able you are to do it again. It's a finite resource, and the more you have to call upon these sort of parts of your brain to make conscious decisions and to resist these automatic things, they get depleted. So the more you do it, the less likely you are to succeed at doing it in future. And it can often feel like you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And the only reason I put this up is to help people understand that it's completely normal and it's okay. Like, you might be like the absolute DevOps champion in your organisation, but you're gonna get caught out by this sometimes because you're trying to do something new. You're trying to behave in new ways. You're trying to sort of instill these new beliefs in your team, but it's a finite resource, and even you will slip up sometimes. And I don't think people should beat themselves up about this. Humans are hard, and we are tricky creatures. This was something that I think it was John Cowie from Etsy said to me in the pub the other day. He said, "Why are they called soft skills? Because they're so hard." And I completely agree. And it's because humans are so complicated. We are all completely unique. And when we get together, it's that sort of chaotic sort of environment. No team is going to be the same as another team, but we've got this underlying thing that we are all human. And when I talk about things like the way our brains behave, these are all things that are common to us all. So instead of beating yourself up that you're going wrong, and instead of pointing fingers and looking to assign blame to people in your team, understand that they're human as well. And that we could all probably be better at this, and that we will get better at this with time. So we've covered quite a lot. I've got a list because I always forget. So we've talked about how our brains work. We've talked about how most of our behaviours and our reactions and our beliefs are actually triggered unconsciously. We've talked about the amount of effort that it takes to change habits, and the amount of time it takes to build new ones. We've talked about how often in our particular careers we are asked to change, and the toll that change takes on us because we've gone through the emotional cycle of change. We understand that resilience is a set of skills, and that it can be improved, and that helps with the way that we deal with change. And we've talked about trust, and that trustworthiness can be improved by the simple act of giving trust. And one of my final points is that I believe that awareness is the greatest agent for change, and that by explaining some of the very human factors and why some of these changes are so hard, that actually it's one of the first steps we need to take to get better at it and to become better leaders and to bring people along with us on this journey. Understanding some of the reasons why all of this fluffy human stuff can be so difficult, and sort of taking a different approach than maybe the one that we use for our infrastructure.
Can I ask you a question on that list? So one of the things you haven't talked about is about status, power, and people's sense of self-worth. So I think one of the issues that I'm finding within my organisation is that not unexpectedly some people are resistant to the DevOps changes because it threatens their position within the organisation, or their position within the team, or their self-worth, or in terms of what makes their role. And so they trying to work with these people is necessary in trying to kind of bring them around into a different way of thinking, but you're already hitting a very much this is about me, a personal thing, where I fit in. That's quite difficult. I don't know if you can say something about that.
Yeah, there's also a thing about, there's these sort of personas that our industry has developed, like the grumpy sysadmin who doesn't say yes to anyone first time they ask for anything, and this is a sort of behaviour that's propagated because if the most senior person in the team behaves in this way and gets away with it, then the more junior people will follow suit, and they'll think that behaving in this way is something that I sort of earn when I'm more senior, and I think that's been going on for a while. There's a really interesting consultancy that started up in Silicon Valley called Compassionate Coding, which is aimed at teaching these people that we're sort of referring to, the people who have got their ivory towers and they shall not be broken down. This is mine, and you can't take it from me. And addressing that with basically some of the methodologies used in compassion-focused therapy. I mean, I get a huge amount of the content of these talks from my sister, who's a clinical psychologist, and she said, "Why don't you talk about compassion-focused therapy?" And I was like, "Oh, where have I heard that before?" It's like, someone else is already doing this out in Silicon Valley as a way of changing the mindset of people. That's not really an answer for you, but it's a very, very recognised problem that people have a lot of their self-worth attached to the superiority of their skill set in one small area, and if you take that away from them, that's a very hard thing for them to do. I think it's an individual thing, but I think maybe some of the aspects of compassion-focused therapy could be used as a management tool there, perhaps. I'm almost done. Sorry I've gone on so long. I said it would be 45 minutes max. But I put this up as one of the last slides because I hate this phrase so much. I see this bandied around by DevOps transformation consultants all the time, and it makes me mad. If you can't change your people, change your people. It's bollocks. It's basically saying fire anyone who struggles adapting to change. Well, hi, we're all human and we're all going to struggle with this in some way, and you can't fire everyone. What that says is that people are looking for a silver bullet. It says that people think that DevOps is something you can just get overnight, even if you've been working in a legacy IT organisation in the same way for decades. It's not that easy. Rebuilding trust is not something that you can do overnight. Reprogramming your automatic behaviours and resetting some of those beliefs within your organisation is not something that's going to happen overnight. When I see this, what it says to me is that the people who don't embrace the change immediately can never change, and I just do not believe that to be true. And hopefully I've given you cause to pause and reconsider your position if you do believe that. I think that we need to be realistic that these things take time, and when people aren't realistic, that's when you find that you will be preyed upon by consultancies who believe that you need to fire your team and hire them. Don't do that. So my real message here is that I think that looking at DevOps through a more human lens can be a huge benefit during a DevOps transformation, and while you try and adopt a new culture and a new way of thinking in your team. Why not look at it from a human point of view? Why not start with the things that cause your team the most stress? Why not look at the things that are waking them up at night and they're losing sleep over? Let's look at the things that are causing them to be away from their families. Let's look at the real human benefits of this. Let's look at ways in which we can give people the trust and autonomy in a safe way that they need and that will help their resilience in the face of change. And let's also do what we're doing tonight. Let's build a community where we can talk about these things in an honest way. Let's talk about the things that we really struggle with, because it is not easy. Because so much of DevOps is about the human stuff, and our humans in our teams are incredibly important, and I believe personally that they are more important than the technology and the tools that we choose. So let's talk about this a bit more often. Sorry I went on too long. Thank you for listening. Ready for any questions? Talk to me about Human Ops is a community that I'm running in London. I'm also organising DevOps Days London, so if you have any input into that. I'm going to be at DevOps Days Zurich in May and in Oslo in November as well. Part of my day job is to build software that wakes people up at night when systems go wrong. So if you'd like to talk to me about life on call, I would love that. And also I'm a bit of a craft beer nerd, so you know, talk to me about beer, I love that. Thank you. Should we do questions here or should we do them in the pub?
I think in the pub is fine.
Yeah.
Any questions? I think you can pretty much ask them.
I was going to ask about psychological safety and this recently popular concept, which seems to be linked with lots of things you're saying. But I was
Oh, it is, yeah. It's sort of the umbrella, isn't it?
If you had some good suggestions on how to create psychological safety in the workplace, so that people have an environment where it's okay to be wrong, which would then correlate with a high trust.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's changing those behaviours, and I think if you've got a blame culture where individuals are sort of held accountable for their mistakes, the way to change that is obviously you can do more ceremonial things like blameless postmortems, where you're supposed to open by talking about, okay, well, we believe that everybody did what they believed was best at the time given the information that they had available, and doing things in a very rigid way like that. But I think there's a day-to-day aspect of it which is just about calling out things where you see it happening. So if you're in a leadership position in your team, or even if you're not, if you see a colleague sort of pointing the finger at another one, whether it be on email or face-to-face or on Slack or whatever, it's just about almost stepping in and saying, like, well, I'm sure they did the best they could in that situation. How can we avoid this happening again? And the more that you do it, the more other people will pick up on it. That would be the first thing I would do, because I think blame has a huge factor in fear, and the sort of aspects of psychological safety.
So, yeah, any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Awesome,
Good job.
thank you.
Good job.